Welcome, friends. Nice to see some familiar faces again, some longtime familiar faces. Barbara and Joni and Trisha, and some newer familiar faces. Catherine, Zarko. Oh, hey, look who's there. How are you? And I see Christina and Julie. Oh, Peter's got some cool glasses on today. And Nazila was here with us last week. Julie, Ruthie, Kimon, oh, Teresa, Jan, Kay. Was Romper Room an international phenomena, or was that just Canadian?
Oh, US.
I was everywhere.
It was in the US.
I need that. You'll remember that, I hope. I see Anna and iPhone. Well, today we are going to get into our opening meditation prayer sooner than normal. I think usually we kind of wait for people to enter the room, but the reality is our numbers kind of go up and down, and this is a weekly thing now, so sometimes we will be more and sometimes we will be less. But I think I'd like to just get right into it so we can use our time more fully. We are going to do a breakout again today, but I am curious, just by show of hands for the people that have their cameras on, and in particular for the people that have been here before, I want to be careful how I word the question. How many of you like having breakouts? Hands up if yes. And is there anyone in particular who is actually anti, and I got the little yellow hand. Is anyone is like really against breakouts? Anyone that wants to vote for that?
Well, can I?
Yes, please.
Yes, I like it when there are 3 or 4 people in the breakup. It's in most places you break up in 2, and this is kind of like diet meditation more than anything else, or it becomes too personal. I feel better when there are 2 people kind of bouncing off each other, maybe 3, but that's my only kind of things. I have been in your seminars twice, or in these meetings, and every time it's 2 people, and I said, well, I felt well, and I said, but it would have been good, like having 3rd person.
Very good.
And I have some, I like it, but when you give us 7 minutes, for me, it's not enough time. I mean, half the time we don't get, it's not even worth,
you just
there's
get
not
started.
Enough time to go anywhere with that, and not everybody can have, if you want to talk, that's like 1 sentence per person, so that's just my thing. So
all right, well, that's great. That's very helpful. So I will take that feedback because it feels resonant, even though it's only 2 out of the group, but it feels resonant with sort of what Garth and I have discussed. And so we'll see where it goes. Now, the randomized rooms, by the way, usually what we can select is a range, 2 or 3, 3 or 4, and it's a little unpredictable. Sometimes we do actually select 3, and then maybe somebody's listening at work, or they get invited to a group but they have to leave or something. So sometimes you're supposed to be in a group of 3 and it doesn't work out. So we'll pay attention to that. I guess that's enough for our feedback. Why don't we get focused and begin? So I'm going to invite you to close your eyes if that feels comfortable for where you are. It will help you to be a part of what we're beginning together here. We're going to begin today with a little guided imagery move into our prayer and then our reflection for the day. So let's begin with a nice deep breath in. I'm going to ask you to pause. You breathe in and hold it. Notice where you're feeling tension, tightness, resistance. And then exhaling long, slow, full exhale, breathing to the absolute full extent of your exhale. Again, breathing in through the nose, nice full breath in. If you like, you can put your right hand over your heart, your left hand over your belly. I like the way this accelerates my feeling of calm. And again, breathing out as long and fully as you can. Now, with the next breath, we're going to exaggerate this a little more, breathing in through the nose, pausing a moment, and just noticing any resistance in yourself or in your life at all. And naming it, sensing it, feeling it. When you're ready, breathe it out. Imagine you can breathe it out. Imagine you can let it go. And breathing out as long as you can, and then breathing out a little more. And then again, a soft inhale. Hold. Finding any place of stuckness, resistance, weariness. And again, the long, long exhale. And then allowing yourself just to sit as you feel the stillness and the silence within you and around you expanding. And I'm going to invite you to use the power of your mind, the power of your inner vision, to picture yourself transported as though the world that is around you right now were dissolving, fading into another place. I invite you to see yourself, feel yourself in a magnificent place in nature, safe, peaceful, and beautiful beyond words. So take a moment as that image or place comes to mind. Don't worry if you don't see it perfectly or feel it perfectly. Envision a healing, powerful, or beautiful place that feels nurturing and safe to be in. And imagine what would it feel like to be there in this moment. The sights, the sounds, the smells. Is there a scent in the wind, a taste in the air? Is it warm or cool, early or late? Is the sky clear or cloudy? Only you know. Let the images unfold and come more clearly. And even if you're a little stuck, you can just choose something that nourishes you. Imagine that you can feel the vibrant energy of this place around you, in contact with your skin, your breath, your heart. And with your next breath, you feel yourself becoming aware of a magnificent energy, like a radiant golden light coming up from the earth herself. What might that feel like? What does that feel like? A beautiful, radiant light emanating from the earth below you, as though the earth were shining into you. Light traveling in through your feet, in through your legs, through your pelvis, up your spine, filling your core, moving out through your arms and fingertips, up through your neck and face. Can you feel the nourishing energy of the earth? Just stay with that for a moment. Picture it, feel it, or imagine it, create it if you have to. How does it feel to be held in this loving earth light? And is there anything that comes to you like an insight, a word, a message, a teaching, as though the earth wanted you to remember something today? Let it be simple, quick and clear, or just a feeling. And then becoming aware of the energy above you, radiant sky, and a shining silver light, barely perceptible, radiating all around and down. It shines down in through the top of your head, through your brain, your head, your face, through your neck, shoulders, arms and hands, down your spine, through your torso, a beautiful, soft silver light from the celestial world above, down through your hips, through your legs and to your feet. Again, just allow yourself to see that, feel that, or create it. As you're held in this vast energy of sky and space. And breathe that in. Sense its qualities and its message or insight for you today, if there is one. And then take this moment to center your attention in your heart. As you feel the beautiful balance of the grounding earth and the inspiring sky, taking your time to absorb and be restored. And then when you're ready, breathing out, releasing the images, holding the energy, and coming back to this moment. You take a moment if any of you received something that you would like to remember, an insight or a feeling. Maybe you have a note paper or something like that. I find that when I guide these things for others, I have the same experience myself. So I try to be in the moment with you and not just in my head about it. I received my message from the earth. I received my message from the sky, and they were simple enough, and yet something to go on for the day and for the week. So for the sake of time and wanting to create some more space for our conversation and dialogue together, I thought I would move just right into some reflections after this meditation. And then we can come back as a large group after the breakouts and talk a little, answer questions, and so on. Now, Peter, your hand is up. Is that intentional?
And grabbed my coffee and felt the warmth of the cup and everything, the memory of it. And I just transported out to this really wonderful place.
Oh, very good. Very good. Well, okay. It's a little bit of a distraction I wasn't looking for, but I'll respond because I actually have something in my pocket, which is a stone that was given to me by an elder that I was working with in Africa. And to your point, Peter, there is a physiological response that we've come to understand that happens when we touch our hearts and our bellies at the same time. However, to your point, I think it's wonderful to encourage people when you're doing a kind of meditation or visualization, particularly if it's short, if there is some object, and it could be as simple as a warm coffee mug, that elicits that feeling of connection and ease. It could be a teddy bear, it could be a stone, it could be your rosary, it could be any number of things. I certainly encourage you to do it. And maybe I'll use that as a transition point into the topic of today. So we had a conversation about spiritual intelligence, and some of you who follow the Old Soul Republic newsletter know that I talked about it this week. In fact, it went out this morning. Or you got it and you didn't check in with it. You'll hear more about it later. So what I thought was valuable for me is to talk a little bit about what I experience as spiritual intelligence. Talk a little bit about what its elements are. This is very much what's talked about in the newsletter this week, but I wanted to do this more sort of live and personal, and have some reflection on why it's important, and perhaps also a reflection on why we struggle with it. Because I think the challenge with spiritual intelligence for me is like IQ, intellect, like EQ, emotional intelligence, and even physical intelligence. We all have some measure of it, right? In my way of thinking of the human, we are mental, at the very least, mental, emotional, physical, spiritual beings. I find those to be four very useful general categories of human experience. And yet, because we live in a society that is so young dominant, as we've talked about in other sessions, so fixated on the material world and its conquest, its study, its organization, and our mastery of it, which is not really physical intelligence. I would really, really define that as intellect, right? Because it's the objectification of the material world. It's the objectification of the body. And certainly over the last arguably 1,000 years or less, this has been perhaps the dominating hallmark of human evolution and the dominant culture moving across the planet. Doesn't mean every culture is focused on this, and it doesn't mean it's the only consciousness, but certainly to master science to the degree we have, technology to the degree we have, medicine to the degree we have, we have quite simply needed to objectify the material world. It works. And yet there's a catch-22, and we go back to that balance of the yin and the yang, the two forces of, acquiring and holding, of going out and going in, of knowledge and mystery. And the problem that we have encountered, of course, is that we have excelled to such a degree with the consciousness of mastery, with the consciousness of objectification, that it has, you might say, tipped the scales, right? So we have moved into an era that has self-perpetuated conquest and colonization, to the point where in too many cases we've lost the tempering wisdom of emotional intelligence, and I would argue spiritual intelligence and even physical intelligence, that can help us make sense of the intellect. So the intellect is what we can do, but I believe the other forms of intelligence help us understand if we should do it. And this is where we're really running into a lot of trouble, right? With technology. Again, we talked about that in an Old Soul Republic recently, for those of you that do that newsletter. And again, none of our objectifications or technologies are problematic in and of themselves, but it is what we do with them, how we apply them, and how we extrapolate from them. And the challenge is, in the absence of spiritual intelligence, and I would argue emotional intelligence, we have a very narrow view of life. And it's a narrow view of life that tends to be fear-based, that tends to be conquest-based, that tends to be protection-based, that tends to be competition-based. And so it fosters division, division, division. Of course, in that proliferation or blossoming of the intellect dominant consciousness, we saw the emotional world all but ignored, and the spiritual world relegated and marginalized. I would argue, though, that with the acceleration of evolution and consciousness, we are now seeing the other forms of intelligence coming back into the story. And arguably in the last 50 years, or some would even say 100, emotional intelligence has leapt forward, right? From times where our grandparents, any one of us, probably had a grandparent that couldn't have imagined why how you felt about something really mattered at all, right? I don't feel like being in this relationship. Well, you're in the relationship. So, I remember a woman in her late 80s who'd been married for 50 years, a little more than 50 years, that I knew very well. And frankly, she didn't really have the most harmonious relationship with her husband. And I asked her, what's the secret to staying together so long? And she said, well, you don't get divorced. I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess that's it, right? There was no, well, you learn to love their eccentricities. There was no, you learn to accept. There's no, you learn to forgive. It was just, how is my dissatisfaction even an issue here, right? So I don't really need to go into that. I think we all probably had enough of a taste of that as young people, what it means to grow up in a world where emotions are not that important. But psychology had its way, and of course, thanks to the good and the bad and the ugly of people like Freud and Jung and Rollo May and Erickson and all these other innovators of psychology, and then certainly big thanks to Oprah, we've all come to understand that the emotional world matters, and that in fact the emotional world is, if unchecked, driving the intellect, right? That it's fear and self-protection, without awareness, without management, without self-regulation, without empathy, that allows the intellect to rule. And yet, while I would argue that probably all of us here, you wouldn't be here if you didn't understand these things. And yet, emotional intelligence isn't really enough either, right? Because we can know about emotional hijacking, and we can know about stress management. We can know what we're supposed to say to people and how we're supposed to forgive people and love everyone and all that stuff. But I would argue that without a deep engagement of our spiritual intelligence, all the others lack their fullness. And in a kind of parallel way, because I personally see the world as a kind of holographic universe where patterns repeat within patterns, we see this mental, emotional, physical, spiritual dimension in all dimensions, or at least I like to see it that way. And so while spiritual intelligence could be called a lot of things, and certainly I'm not the only person to think about it or write about it or talk about it, I see it as having a primary expression in each of the 4 areas of our life: the mental, the emotional, the physical, the spiritual. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what those four are. Again, some of you may have already got a little taste of this through the newsletter. And if you don't know the newsletter, we'll pause for a quick reference. In support of, but not essentially connected to this session, I do a weekly newsletter called The Old Soul Republic. There's no fee, there's no promotion, and it's just a topic a week with a video and some writing. Sometimes it's very connected to what we do here. Sometimes it's not very connected at all. And it's just a way for people to kind of explore the same material through different facets, right? Through video or through reading, because so much of what we talk about, at least I hope, has many layers to it. And so to process it multiple times, at least for me, I mean, believe me, I'm creating it here, so I'm enjoying it every time. I'm learning something every time. I hope you do as well. And if you want to learn about that, you can just find my website, look up my name. There's a link there. But I was saying that the idea of four facets of spiritual intelligence stand out as essential to me. So the physical expression of spiritual intelligence would be your awareness of energy, in particular, subtle energy. The emotional expression of spiritual intelligence would be your sense of connection, connectedness, your innate feeling of connectedness, your capacity for connectedness. Your intellectual expression of spiritual intelligence would be intuition. And that would be clairsentience, clairaudience, the ability to visualize. And then certainly we have the spiritual expression of the spiritual, which I consider the tendency to or capacity for surrender, which in Western traditions is usually thought more in terms of faith, right? So in modern psychology, we talk about surrender and vulnerability. In the Eastern traditions, they talk about, overcoming the ego or the eradication of the ego, right? The embrace of non-duality. But it's kind of all the same thing to me. It means that you are comfortable with or even oriented around a higher consciousness, a transcendent consciousness that may be immanent in a part of your life, but is also beyond your life, right? That is available to your mental, emotional, physical, spiritual nature and being and intellect, but also is beyond it, right? And I would argue that if you could combine the kind of soul work, which I've talked about before, learning, loving, helping, and being, with the spiritual intellect, intuition, connection, surrender, and energy, that's a pretty full plate. I'd say that's a pretty rich path. And I would argue or suggest that it's your spiritual intelligence that will help you make the most of those four aspects of soul work, or those four, essentially your purpose here. Now, do we, like any intellect, right? People do intelligence tests and emotional intelligence tests. Do we all have the same aptitude? Well, that's a controversial question, because I think many of us have been taught and have come to believe that we are all equal and that we are all capable of the same things and that we all have equal access to everything, right? I mean, if you've read any spiritual growth or personal growth books in the last 50 years, if you've seen any teacher, if you've been on social media, you've probably been promised that if you put your mind to it, you can, not figuratively, but literally, do anything that what the mind thinks it can create. Well, I would say kind of, and that's not a very popular position today. I mean, I certainly have certain wishes that I have revisited in my life probably 1,000,000 times, and they still aren't true. I haven't mastered the art of flying in this body physically. I've done some pretty good astral travel in my day, and things like that. But I think I want to comment on this for a moment. I think that the idea that we can do anything has been a bit convoluted, and some messages have become mixed. And I think the messages that have been mixed, in my opinion, are the ancient messages, which ultimately I believe were predominantly metaphorical, in fact, pointing us towards spiritual intelligence. That in the realm of spiritual intelligence, anything is possible, in the sense that when we go into the imaginal realm, when we go into the spirit realm, yes, we can absolutely fly. Yes, we can absolutely know anything. Yes, we can absolutely be anywhere. We can conjure the energy of anything. This is where extraordinary healing comes from, whether it's ancient shamanism or modern day Joe Dispenza workshops. I believe in the realm of spiritual intelligence, there's absolute truth in that view. On the other hand, I think it's fair to say, well, I mentioned there were some convoluting forces. So then we also have the sort of the advent of the realization of choice. And that was kind of like a postmodern realization, right? As we learn to deconstruct the world and we recognize the power of psychology, the power of our thoughts over the world. And certainly this came with the New Thought movement, which has been an extraordinary influence on the world. There is no question that our thoughts shape our reality and that our experience of the world is a reflection of our perception and our perceptive style. However, I'd like to suggest that the missing piece is this element of individualism, which suggests that if I want it or I think it, I will get it. And what, for me, you don't have to agree, but what I feel it leaves out is the rest of the universe. Does God want it? Does the universe want it? Because I believe here that any one of us, and probably many of us, have wanted healing in all kinds of different ways that we've still not seen. Did you not deserve it? Right? I mean, are you wrong for asking for it? I don't think that's the case. I think the simple truth is that life is the confluence of more forces and factors than we can possibly imagine, that may include everything from genetics to karma to past lives to the influence of other energies and beings. Who could possibly know? And yet, in the midst of it all, is our own intelligence, our own energy, our own thought powerful? Absolutely. And is it even dominant in our lives? Absolutely. But is it exclusively in control of things? I would argue that's unlikely. At least it's not what I've seen. And this takes us back to spiritual intelligence, which is to say that we don't all have the same aptitudes there. Some people visualize easily, some people don't. Some people feel energy easily, some people don't. Some people are born with an innate sense of human connection, compassion, and sameness, relatedness, and some people aren't. And similarly, some people have an optimistic, buoyant personality that tends towards faith and letting go, and others don't. It doesn't make you less spiritual, although it does mean that you may want to play to your strengths. One aspect of spiritual intelligence more than another. It does mean that you may want to pay attention to cultivating growth in areas that don't come as easy or naturally to you, while being forgiving or compassionate about those aspects that you don't seem to have influence over. And my common sort of comparison is music, sports, math. I mean, there's all kinds of aptitudes in the world, and it certainly follows that we would have spiritual aptitudes as well. And so some people can do, fractions in their head, and some people were born to be able to do a basketball layup with either hand and have a 10-foot vertical. Some people will never get there. And I think that in the spirit of my experience of oneness, consciousness, love, and spirituality, accepting difference, accepting limit is ironically a part of our limitless capacity. It almost seems too paradoxical to make any sense at all, but the more we allow our humanness to be okay, the more we allow our limits to be okay, even in spiritual intelligence, I would argue we relax enough to be open to more possibility. And certainly the aptitudes of spiritual intelligence, intuition, connection, energy, surrender, will all blossom in the feeling of trust, comfort, acceptance, love. So it doesn't really help to be ambitious about these things, although you can pursue them and you can work at them and you can cultivate them. Where I'd like to close, and then we'll turn it to you as a group, is that for me, I think the most difficult part of cultivating and integrating spiritual intelligence into everyday life, and that means how you make decisions, how you relate to friends, and to do it in a truly integrated and universal way, which means, well, yeah, in this area of my life, I always ask for guidance, or I always trust God, or I always, whatever, listen for the insight. But then in this other area, I'm still trying to make something happen. I'm not really interested in listening because I'm not getting the answer I want, or whatever that might be. So I think that in addition to all the things I've talked about, I think it's fair to acknowledge that we are in an environment, particularly in the Western world, that predominantly does not celebrate any of these qualities. Now, there's exceptions. If you're on Humanity's Stream and you're one of the subscribers, you're consuming material that is helping you remember that these limits are not true. And if you're from an indigenous community, you're surrounded by people who are confirming this is not true. If you're in a spiritual community or you come hang out here, you're surrounded by those who confirm this is not true. But for the most part, from the moment you wake to the moment you go to bed, there are subtle and dramatic cues everywhere that say that facts are more than intuition, that self-protection, if given a choice, is more important than connection, that being in control is more important than surrender, and that while energy may feel real, we'll wait till someone writes a book about it that proves through material science that it's true, right? Like we all love when a doctor has a past life experience, or when a doctor feels energy. We're like, oh, it must be true, because it wasn't true in the last 10 books I read when some wacko yogi or guru or shaman or witch said it, right? So on that note, I think it's time for some conversation. We'll do at least 10 minutes because you're right, 7 minutes is not enough. And also we'll look at the clock, see if we can get a little more time in. And really the question is to talk about your experience of spiritual intelligence in your life, and how have you felt discouraged, or well, how have you worked with the discouragement of spiritual intelligence in your life? And your story might be, I'm still struggling with it. I used to be so energy sensitive as a kid, but I shut it down and I'm still trying to get it back. Or it might be, well, here's what I did to reclaim it. So a little bit about our own experience. Right now, we have 3 people per room. Oops, wait a second. Yeah, we have 3 people per room, and we're going to go for about 10 minutes. So no chatting right now. Let's go to the group. Let's practice respectful listening. Let's make sure everybody gets a little time. There's a little more than 3 minutes per person. And talk a little bit about how do you relate to the topic of spiritual intelligence and what's it been like to invest in that in your own life, to experience that in your own life. Have you celebrated it your whole life? Have you struggled with it? Is it a mixed bag? What's your experience of intuition, connection, surrender, and energy? Where are you at with it now? So good luck, be kind, and I'll call you back soon. Adios. Welcome back. Welcome back. Okay, we're going to probably go just a few minutes over, but we'll try to respect the time.
I like that yellow background, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I'm the man of ever-changing backgrounds. I don't have a final established office in my new home setting. So anyway, some of you, Barbara, Leanna, Joni, Trish, Peter, Chris, you've seen me. I don't know if I've missed someone. You've seen me with a lot of different backgrounds, and they will continue to evolve. Nazila, did you want to start with something? Because we're going to take, we're going to take a few comments. I'm going to ask everyone to just keep your comments as short as possible. I'll try to keep my responses as short as possible, and we'll try to wrap up by a few minutes past the hour.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for the meditation and our group together. It was really interesting. My meditation had to do, I'm not familiar with the newsletter, but my meditation had to do with what you shared, was that I saw myself getting in the water and there was gold underneath my feet. And lot of gold, like bonds, like big bonds, but it was uneven. And when I came out of the water, I was in that space of abundance. And later, I thought to myself, when I came out of the meditation, I asked myself, how come I didn't pick up the gold? So that was interesting, because in that realm, it didn't even occur to me in that the spiritual intelligence that you were pointing out, it didn't occur to me to pick up the gold. I just walked out as if I am full. And there was the sun as I was hearing you guide the meditation, and the sun just dried me up. The wetness that I came out of the water, and I was happy. But later, when I thought, I said, oh, I wonder how come I didn't pick up the gold.
So that's a beautiful image, and thank you. I think we all just got a little something out of that. But I will say it reminds me of something that I noticed I've spent a tremendous amount of time in Indigenous communities and still do. And one thing that that really changed my own life was that, and I'm generalizing and I can't speak for other cultures or traditions, but it was my experience that in the Indigenous communities that I spent time in, spiritual experiences, just like what you're talking about, are self-complete, in the sense that to have the feeling of healing is healing. To have the feeling of richness is richness. To have the knowing of infinite nature is infinite nature. It doesn't need to suddenly translate into some new tool or some new wealth or some new meaning that we can articulate, right? It's enough just to have the vision. It's enough to have the dream. I'm going to just move from there. I wanted to point out Asher's comment because I think it's very important to get his advice. I like it. And I also want to add a little something. He writes, after you ask, like he was talking about when we don't always get the healing we seek and so on. He said, don't believe you'll be healed, switch to knowing that you'll be healed. And it will work. It's just getting there. That's a very, very powerful and important teaching. And it's essential to engaging the power of consciousness and energy in miraculous healing. I think the reason why I make comments about how it doesn't always work like that, it's not meant to diminish the practice. I think he is 100% right in my experience, not that it's about right or wrong, but I'm absolutely with him. You have to be in the full conviction, right down to your very core. And actually on Humanity's Stream, there's a lot of great teachers who talk about this. Greg Braden does a lot of work on this. However, I have been involved in a lot of spiritual healing settings where truly miraculous healings have happened. I've seen, I know firsthand people that have been completely healed of 4th stage cancer. I've seen people completely healed, and I mean healed, like it's there and it's gone, like all kinds of things. And I have seen people not healed who, as far as I could tell, were as convicted and sometimes more, believed it and sometimes more, owned it and sometimes more. So I do believe that grace is just an element of it. And I felt in my own, I'll just leave it at this, and then we'll squeeze in 1 or 2 more comments. I have felt in my own life, I can't comment for anyone else, that I have chosen to be respectful of grace. And if something doesn't come the way I want it, or the way I believed it, or even the way I knew it, that there may be a bigger gift in the experience of living with it or learning from it. And that a greater healing is possible for me, not by getting the material change that I want, but by accessing a profound level of acceptance, or almost, as Nazila said, accessing that inner place of total healing and abundance. So that's a little bit of a balance there. Now we do have to wrap up in a couple minutes, but Zarko, your hand is up, and I see Mercedes. I'm going to invite you to be the last 2 speakers. And if you could only, with all due respect, just make it brief. So Zarko, please unmute yourself and share whatever you want to share.
Okay.
You're good.
Okay. I love this, what you said, that, that we should be kind of modest, or instead of thinking that we can manifest anything. It's not quite true. And I just wanted to add one thing. You mentioned, what does God want? What does universe want? And I would say also what the other people, other person, other tribes, other cultures want. It's not, we cannot impose our will also on the will of the other people. So we live in the community. So our decision and manifestation should also take in consideration other people, or be broken by the other people. That's normal. And if we do believe that we can do anything at all, then we are considering ourselves to being like a God, and we are not God yet. We are not, we might, okay.
Yes, there's so much to say, so I'm not going to say too much except yes and, right? I think that it's possible to live in a universe where both your emphasis on humility and respect for the vastness of this world that we're in is essential. And I would all still affirm Asher's absolute conviction. And I think that when we look at the practices of manifestation or radical healing, we actually notice that the most consistent or powerful typically conclude with something to the equivalent of, "Thy will be done," which means I am in conviction. I know this to be true, but the punctuation is, "and now it's in your hands," which is kind of the balance, which means that the God gets to define what healing is in this case. Although we may have the absolute conviction, both can coexist. There's lots there. Maybe we'll come back to this next week. Mercedes, did you want to add something before we close?
Yeah, I wanted to say that when you talked about accepting the differences in the spiritual intelligence and talking about can we really do everything or not, is grace the one that deciding what we can and not? And something came to mind. Perhaps when we are into the practice itself or in the realm of intelligence, in spiritual intelligence, we are in touch with the one where everything is possible. But when we are in our daily lives, even though we are connected, I was wondering if somehow what is happening, I don't know where the thought came, it's that somehow in that spiritual contract I signed for in my spiritual development in this time life, somehow that is some of the clauses
Yes.
that say there. I won't be able to do this because that is part of the things I'm working on. And if I have completely, so it's not that I am limited, it's just that in this time life, I'm working with that specific thing, but I don't know.
Yes.
I don't remember.
Yeah, for me, and I think this is a beautiful note to end on. For me, that is the way I hold it, which is that there is what I've talked about, a yin and a yang to absolutely everything. The yang is I affirm this, I choose this, I claim this, I believe this, I manifest this, I know this, I go beyond belief, I know this in my bones. And the yin is I accept that this exists within a mystery. I accept that my soul's purpose is ultimately beyond my intellect. And so it's only between this dance that my life will unfold. And I would argue, I mean, if we come from an infinite source, if we come from a mysterious source, then absolute control would have to be an impossibility. Absolute control. Because how can you, it's sort of like people who say, you know, I've been alive long enough, I understand love. And it's like, well, I hope you just mean that metaphorically, because how could you possibly understand something that you could spend a million lifetimes coming to know? How could you possibly name it? So it suggests a process. It suggests mystery and conviction. And there is a paradox, and the paradox is that we are an expression of the manifest and the unmanifest, the known and the unknown, the control and the acceptance and surrender. Now, on that note, I would love to continue, but I'm just going to say, I'm so grateful that you were here today. We will continue next week. Please check out Humanity's Stream if you want more programming by other people to explore these things. And yes, you can certainly look me up if you want to know a little more about what I'm up to and get into one of my newsletters. And I think I'm going to end simply today and just say thank you and bless you. And may you experience your own spiritual intelligence and brilliance until we meet again. Bye-bye. Take care. Thank you.